Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at the Delaware Art Museum checking out the work of illustrator, artist, and writer Christian Robinson. This is going to be a show that will delight children of all ages. I can hardly contain myself. Hop on board the kids bus. The 302 is headed your way. Welcome to the Delaware Art Museum, where we're talking about artist, illustrator, and writer Christian Robinson. I'm joined now by Heather Campbell Coyle to talk a little bit about Robinson's vast array of books and his art. Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming out to the Delaware Art Museum.
So let's talk a little bit about this young artist who really has transcended art into illustration and really helping kids to see a bigger worldview.
Absolutely. So Christian Robinson is a relatively young illustrator. But his first book came out in 2013. So he's got a decade and over, I think his 20th book is due out.
Oh, wow.
Pretty soon, which is a collaboration with Amanda Gorman, the poet. So he's been incredibly prolific. The exhibition here at the museum includes 17 of Christian Robinson's books he illustrated, and some that he also helped to author.
So let's talk a little bit about the name, What Might You Do? Why did you choose that name?
Well, Christian Robinson, What Might You Do, is a traveling exhibition. It comes to us from the National Center for Children's Illustrated Literature in Abilene, Texas, and the name actually came with it. But I think it sums up the interest in possibility that you see in Robinson's works. In many of the books that he makes, they show the possibilities for children and families.
So one of the books, this is the most recent book, The Last Stop on Market Street. Now, this is a highly acclaimed book. Tell us about it.
Yes, so Last Stop on Market Street has won basically all the book awards that children's books can win. It has won a Caldecott honor. It has won a Coretta Scott King Illustrator honor. It's been a bestseller. It's been, on the New York Times bestseller list for children's books. It's a really wonderful example of Robinson's interest in grounding his books in the everyday life that children lead, and in his own experiences as a child growing up as well.
Now, the star of this book, besides the young boy, is his grandmother, and he rides the bus with his grandmother, and it really kind of explores the relationship that Robinson had in his real life.
Yes, so Robinson's mother was incarcerated during parts of his childhood, and he was raised by his grandmother in a busy house full of cousins and aunts and uncles, and he actually took to drawing to create a world for himself, to find space in this busy world. But his close relationship with his grandmother and their diverse neighborhood in Los Angeles helped to inspire this book.
Now, it's amazing when you read the book, the boy discovers that there are so many different kinds of people. You have a gentleman who is blind. There is a gentleman that has a bunch of tattoos. So it's kind of like him discovering just how different and varied the world is.
Absolutely. Christian Robinson believes that it's really important for kids to see themselves represented in books, as whether they are your abilities, your age, your gender identification, your ethnicity. He thinks it's important to show that incredible diversity that you encounter in American cities as part of his books.
It's sort of like, flavors or colors of the spectrum, that there are so many and they're all beautiful. I wanted to bring up, you mentioned his mother being incarcerated. Milo, he actually writes about this to kind of help other kids that, may be going through this or have a playmate that's going through this.
Yes, so Last Stop on Market Street was actually written by Matt De La Pena. It's a collaboration between the two of them. And as they got to know each other, Robinson also wanted to work on this project with Matt, the writer, And they put together this incredible story of a boy riding the subway in the city, and he makes pictures of all the people who come on the subway. He imagines what their lives might be like. And in some cases, he imagines glamorous and exciting lives. He imagines more, sadder stories, and he wonders what they think of him. And then he's surprised when he finds that one of these boys who is riding the train along with him gets off on the same stop as him to visit his incarcerated mother as well.
Now, when you look at the book, you actually see, when you go to visit someone in prison, you have to go through metal detectors, and he shows all of the different people that are going in to visit loved ones, and it's kind of like gives you a child's perspective that this is what actually happens, and these are the people who love the people they're visiting, and it really is a tender look at a very difficult subject, especially for kids.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the really strong aspects of Christian Robinson's work is that how inclusive it is and how, as I said, tender, heartfelt his stories are.
Now, the book that I have here is in Spanish. So you have, as far as the exhibit goes, you have everything in English and in Spanish, right?
Yes. Many of Christian Robinson's books are available in Spanish. And we thought it would be great, with that in mind, to also make the exhibition text bilingual.
It's really beautiful the way it's set up. So talk to me a little bit, when we come into the exhibition, where does it begin and what does it take us through?
Sure. The exhibition is organized by story. So the illustrations from each book are grouped together. There are 17 books in all, ranging from picture books with almost no words. I think there is one with no words, and all the way up to young reader books, which tell stories of historical people like Josephine Baker and Florence Mills. And throughout the exhibition, there are also enlargements of Robinson's work, as well as his original drawings. I think that we're so used to experiencing children's illustration in books. It's really interesting to see how the artist makes them, and that's what a museum exhibition makes possible.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we return.
Hi, I'm Kate Sawmill, Head of Textile Conservation at Winterthur Museum, and I'm excited to get dressed up with a 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the illustration and the artwork and just the impact that Christian Robinson is having on children's book and children in general. And I'm joined by Heather Campbell Coyle to talk a little bit about that. Now, before we went to break, we talked a little bit about how Robinson creates these images for his books. What's the process?
Sure. So Robinson likes to experiment with some different techniques, but he's using collage. He's using acrylic paint on paper, often which he'll paint something and then cut it out and collage it with other elements. And then he also, at least one of his books here is done in colored pencils. So sometimes some very modest, and I think for children relatable materials are used to make these outstanding illustrations.
Now, you mentioned the collaboration with Matt de la Peña. And you have a storyboard that kind of talks about the collaborative process, because he puts together what he thinks should be in the book. And sometimes if he's collaborating, he gets feedback from the writer or an editor, right?
Sure. So Robinson talks about how when he is illustrating, he looks for books that leave space for the illustrator. He doesn't want to just be illustrating somebody's words. He wants it to be a story that's told through images and words, show, don't just tell. A great example of seeing how he's working out a story visually is the book Rain. Rain is a board book for little kids. It has very few words, and it beautifully intertwines two stories. It's intertwining the story. It's a rainy day, right? It's a very simple concept. It intertwines the story of an old man who wakes up grumpy because it's rainy, and then he's got to go get all dressed for the rain to go out to his coffee shop like he does every day. And the story of a joyous little boy who gets to get dressed up. I remember my daughter was like this, in his fun rain hat with a frog on it and his boots, and is excited to go out on this rainy day to the very same cafe.
It's really interesting and really cool and cute, the juxtaposition of the two, grumpy and happy at the same time. So when we talk about his art, because that's what it is, it's art for kids. It's I guess the first introduction to art for children, right?
Yes, most children first encounter, illustration as art. And his illustrations can be incredibly sophisticated. I think his play of color, his simplification of form, it all works very well and communicates clearly to children and to their parents, but it's also artistically, he's drawing from a range of inspirations and creating these very sophisticated images.
Now, in his, inspiration, his art is inspired of 50s and 60s art, is that right?
Absolutely. I think that you can see the kind of modernism with those interesting color choices he makes, those poppy colors, the blockiness often of his forms, those simplified forms, almost trending toward abstraction. I think you get a real mid-century vibe from some of his illustrations. I loved reading that one of his favorite books growing up is Are You My Mother?
Oh.
It was one of my favorites. It was one of my favorites to read to my daughter, a really simple and kind of repetitive story with just wonderful illustrations.
Absolutely. I think his books are really interesting in fact that they not only do they tackle tough subjects, but they do it in such an innocent, joyous way. And it, like I said, it's also a way to, lay the groundwork for art as a child gets a little bit older. So when kids come, they actually have an opportunity to do some art and do some interpretation from the exhibit. Can you tell us about the bus?
Sure. So we knew it was really important for a children's exhibition to have space specifically and activities specifically for children within the gallery. So not only are the illustrations from the stories shown, we have all the books. As we said before, we have the books in Spanish whenever possible, as well as in English. And they are all in an adorable little library built in the form of a bus, riffing off Last Stop on Market Street. So there's a bus where people can take books or roll right in and read with their children.
So before we go to talk about all of the events that you do throughout the year, I wanted to talk about this one book, Josephine Baker. So he really takes a look at just an icon in jazz music. Can you talk to me a little bit about this book?
I love the book Josephine. I can't imagine a figure who would have been less likely to be in a children's book in my 1970s childhood than Josephine Baker, a dancer, performer, an extraordinary figure in American history, but one that wasn't necessarily taught to children. And working with an author, Robinson is able to translate her wonderful biography into a story for kids that talks about her humble beginnings in her family and her travel to Paris and her dance career. So it's, he weaves in segregation and other important stories, the Great Migration, into this children's book in a really playful, but also elegant and thoughtful way.
Absolutely. This is definitely one that I would pick up for nieces and nephews. So when we come back, we're going to talk about all of the programs that they have here at the Delaware Art Museum for children. Stay with us.
I'm Mike Connolly. I'm the Executive Director at the Newcastle Historical Society. We'd love to welcome you to Newcastle and tell you all about the history of the 302, Delaware.
Welcome back. So when you come to check out the Christian Robinson exhibit, you can also take a couple of these books home for yourself because you have these in the gift shop. Is that right?
Yes, we are delighted to have stocked many of Christian Robinson's books, including some books that are newer even than the exhibition, in our gift shop to allow people to take books home to read, as well as reading here in the reading bus, or checking out our kids' corner downstairs, which always is a wonderful reading space and play space for families visiting the Delaware Art Museum.
Tell me more about the kids' place.
Sure. Our kids' corner is actually designed, it's redesigned every few years by local families, local illustration-oriented or artist families, really. The bus that's actually in Christian Robinson was originally here as an ice cream truck in an earlier version of our Kids Corner, put together by the Smith family. And Daniel Smith came in and repainted it for this show. So our children's space does change every couple of years, and it's always full of ideas around storytelling and creative play for families.
And you have regular story times, is that right?
Yes, so 2 Fridays a month, the Delaware Art Museum hosts Story and Studio, where children and their families are invited to examine a work of art in the museum and then go make a piece of art in our studio inspired by the work that they've seen, either a piece from our collection or a piece from a visiting exhibition like the Christian Robinson Show.
And this is something that's really important. We talked about how the books are a good introduction for children to art, but having a space like this where families can come and kids can be kids, because sometimes if you got a couple of kids, parents are a little nervous to take them to places where you're not supposed to touch things. But this is a space that helps them discover. And how important is it for children to be exposed to a space like what you provide?
Absolutely. The Delaware Art Museum, I think in part because illustration is such a core part of what we do here, has always been a really family-friendly museum. So we have a children's play space. We have studio programs for children. We run a summer camp for kids. So we're always thinking about how to make the museum experience accessible to children. Sometimes it's really simple things, like in Christian Robinson, you may have noticed when you walked through, the illustrations are hung pretty low. We want kids to be able to see them well.
I was going to say, what goes into, setting up an exhibit like this, since your audience is, a lot of adults are going to look at this and they're going to enjoy it and get a lot from it. But, kids, it's a different perspective. So what goes into designing something like this?
So for me, this is actually the first children's illustration show I've done since taking over the illustration collection. It was important to keep color in the space and important to have some large blow-ups, because you know how kids always want to point to things? Well, that's a larger and lower blow-ups where they can point out things and talk to their families about them. Was one of the things, and also maybe take a picture in front of them.
Absolutely, and the whole interaction thing, because I feel like kids learn when they are able to have their hands on things, and like the bus is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, so our Director of Learning and Engagement, Sarah Lynn Rosenfield, had the wonderful idea to, bring the bus back and have the children's books in there. She also felt it was important to have an area for kids to actually draw within the gallery. Christian Robinson talks about how he goes to museums and galleries for inspiration in making his work now. So let's get the kids active and inspired while they're here and making some drawings right in the gallery with Christian Robinson's work.
Absolutely. So you've got this exhibit, you've got the children's corner downstairs, you have the camps. What other kinds of things do you provide for kids throughout the year, and how do people, get involved in it?
Sure. So we have, we've talked about camps. We also sometimes, not just summer camps, sometimes we have some camps for those random day off that your children might get. We have a Kidchella program this summer. And so it's a music program that's family friendly. Our happy hours, I think, are a hidden gem for families. I so wish there'd been somewhere I could go do something like this when my daughter was little, just hang out, meet up with friends on our grassy lawn in a nice, safe space for kids to hang out and for their parents to talk to other parents as well. So really being, family focused. As I said, we have studio programs, including classes for kids to want to dive more deeply into the making of art.
Sure, and it really is such a powerful form of expression. Whether a child or a teenager, for that matter, wants to become an artist, it's one thing. It allows them to explore and discover, and just really, if there's something on their heart or in their head, to get it out.
Right, and I think that's what, the Milo book and many of Christian Robinson's interviews, when he talks about how he drew to create space for himself. Yeah. He shows a child drawing the world around him, and that's what he grew up to do. So unless kids are introduced to it, that as an idea, they're not going to know about that.
Well, hopefully everyone will come down and check out the exhibit, or at least check out his books, because they're all really wonderful. Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jackie.
We'll be right back. Are you enjoying flipping through Christian Robinson's work? Me too. If you come and check out this exhibit, make sure you snap a few pictures and tag us on Facebook. Now, here are a couple of other things in our community you need to check out. For more information on any of the exhibits here at the Delaware Art Museum, visit delart.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. Make sure you follow us on Facebook for more behind-the-scenes videos and information you won't see anywhere else. We're going to leave you now with more of Christian Robinson's work. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.